It is my pleasure to introduce you to our two speakers in the afternoon. First is Jennifer Baker, and she will be talking about philosophy as a way of life and management studies. Jennifer Baker graduated from the Brown University and earned her PhD from the University of Arizona, began teaching at Duke and UNC, and is now a professor at the College of Charleston in Charleston, South California. She worked up updating ancient virtues for use today. Her upcoming book project is on how practical the Stoic concept of moral indifference can be. She has written in philosophy of economics, moral psychology, and ethical theology. Some of her publications include Who's Afraid of a Final End, Aristotle and Ansel, Behavioral Science and Virtue, and Virtue Ethics and Political Practical Guidance, Virtue Ethics and the Work of Ethics, and an entry in the Oxford Book of Ethics and Economics. She co-edited Economics and the Virtues, Building a New Moral Foundation with Mark D. White for OUP. She serves on the Medical Ethics Committee and her state hospital, worked with local law enforcement to bring about improvements in Charleston Community's jail. She sits on the board on the South Carolina for Criminal Justice Reform and My Community Keepers Mentor Group.
Thank you so much. I am really grateful to be here, and I'm just going to begin with my thanks. I feel like I was found by philosophy as a way of life by Notre Dame's. Oh, is it not working?
No, I don't want to.
It's not on, so
Yes.
there's a button here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's hidden. I'll turn this off, not to make interference. If you need to speak, just turn it on. So it's here in the middle. Yes.
Well, I'm just grateful for a lot of reasons to get to work on this project. So the Notre Dame program in philosophy as a way of life was my introduction to it. So I'm kind of a recent student of Hadot, and I work on contemporary Stoic ethical theory. And I think of the philosophy as a way of life crowd as the nicest to us contemporary Stoics. Really appreciate that. And the reason I think it's really nice that you guys make a home for contemporary Stoics is that I'm starting to get discouraged by contemporary ethics making space for contemporary Stoics. There's been some amazing work by virtue ethicists who present a complicated account, and it doesn't get a lot of uptake. So it's to me, there's a lot of promise in philosophy as a way of life in introducing ethical ideas that might not reach mainstream ethics and philosophy. And then I'm also very grateful on behalf of my college. I mean, they were excited to send me here and make me a philosophical pilgrim because they're really eager for the business school to have someone reach out to them with a philosophical project. The associate dean of the business school is going to be working with this on me. I intimidated her by sending a bunch of Hadot. I should not have done that without explanation. I'm still trying to build her courage, but we've had wonderful discussions about management. I feel like those working in management are so hungry for interactions like that. So I'm grateful on behalf of our management professors as well. These are the questions that I'll be looking at. Can a management role even be part of living philosophically? And then is current management theory, I don't know how familiar you are with it, but I think it will be okay if you are. Is it in service of the philosophical life? That might sound laughable, but you might be surprised. And then the criteria for that would be, is it theoretical, systematic, concentrated, and capable of strong psychological effects? And then this is probably getting too normative. I'll be very quick about it, but I do of course see Stoicism as helping with A and B. Were we able to tap into it? On question A, can a manager live authentically, undarkened by consciousness, unharassed by worry? Can she achieve a concentration and expansion of the self? Can a manager be self-conscious and have an exact vision of the world? I mean, I'm really curious as to what you guys think about this. There are, of course, some reasons to assume the answer will be no. This is Philo, I guess, quoting him, but describing us having contempt for the marketplaces. There are a lot of reasons to worry about management theory. I mean, management theorists themselves tell us this. There are just some strange factors in its approach. So they teach a kind of outdated economics. So economists don't approve of the economics taught in management courses. So it's a bit ideological. There is description from professors of management and also business ethicists, you know, they should work together. That the students don't take any ethics talk seriously or values talk seriously. And you know, there are worries that the professors are having a negative impact even in trying to teach management theory. Why I think we should not just quit here. I mean, it's really significant how we're treated at work and the work we do, of course. What I'm seeing is that we're failing to pick up the ethical questions involved, and including philosophy of markets and philosophy of economics is what I keep seeing being missed in management theory. And then I think you'll all be able to see just from me showing you, there's an incredible amount of hunger from management theorists for philosophy and philosophy on how to live. I mean, I think this will be very easy for me to demonstrate. This is just the field of management studies is a little complicated because social scientists can work in it and they do experiments with controls of you know, psychologists, sociologists. There's also then management theory, which isn't just taught in MBA programs. You can take a management course as an undergraduate. There's a lot of use of a case-based approach. And then there's also, as I'll point out, what's discovered in practice. And this is an interesting parallel, I think, to Hadot's critique of professional philosophy. And I have a complaint from a practitioner about how poor theory is compared to what they discover in practice of necessity. So believe it or not, there are at least 89 management theories. This is just an example of a kind of a cheap book that includes 89 theories. There are probably more. They don't cohere together. So this is, you know, a radically different take than transformational leadership. But there's still use of the older theories, and as you know, is a pretty wild history when it comes to management theory. But it's not like even the oldest, like Taylor's theory, have become obsolete. Like there's a lot of going back to the older theories, but they're not united. Here's just an example of the book that's kind of a cheat sheet to the theories. So the management theorists I'm working with, you know, they're committed to one or the other of these. I don't know how social scientists test any one given the set. Look how many. And then here's just a really recent example of complaints from practitioners. So these are HR professionals, you know, they all come up with new names. I mean, that's probably the problem with the 89 theories, but people analytics world, terrible name. And there people are doing serious work and he's mocking what he learned in management classes. There is fraud that has had a big impact in management theory. So this is, I mean, I think this is within the week. It's is it a retraction notice? Very heavily cited studies seem to have just made up data. Kind of a sign of poor health. And then I don't mean to pick on this book. The books are incredibly popular. I can't really find like one measure of that, but this is my example of the hunger there is. People purchase books that talk about how to manage, and then I just want to show you how familiar the language is. So you have to be authentic. There's some of the wording from the book here. You have to be curious. You can't be data driven, you have to be data informed, you have to use your own judgment, creative, comfortable with ambiguity, you have to be resilient, you have to know how to regroup, how to build your resilience. You know, there's how to after all of these. But these are our topics. There's some recent work from McKinsey, so it's like, internal practices, I guess, as I describe them. And the methodology is interesting because I would love for you to help me relate this to SageDump, because they interview successes in the field. So this is a real commitment to the status quo as a norm. But even that said, here's an example of what they're suggesting you need to be a leader. You have to be a visionary, you have to be your best self, a catalyst, a coach, you have to be an architect. So this is as recent as it gets, and this is based on, and I think they interviewed 1,000 business leaders. So there are topics, and I think I've shown they're interested in transformation. So to be a leader, you have to transform into someone who has those qualities. There are some puzzles that seem unsolved. So you may have heard of like managerial overconfidence. So it looks like, these things are probably hard to study, but it looks like some of our leaders are overly optimistic, and we enjoy that, even if they bring us to ruin. It just makes things quicker. There's interesting research. It looks like, this is a little bit older. I tried to get fresh stuff, but there was a study I enjoyed, probably a decade old, that suggested one thing CEOs had in common was that they had a very hard to read face. So that encouraged coordination in the meeting room. You just could not, you had to guess what he was thinking and who he was for. And then from the field itself, they're admitting they talk a lot, publish a lot on transformational leadership. That's just one of the 89 theories. But they can't yet explain the mechanism, so it's like they're asking for philosophical help, which as a philosopher I feel is rare. I feel we should answer when we get asked for help. And then this is a terrible situation. I hope I don't sound unfair saying it, but I have spent a lot of time with business ethicists, with business ethics. Sorry, it's not jet lag. I think I just learned so much at this conference. That's why I'm like. But business ethics is I'm embarrassed of it as an ethicist. Like it does a poor job. Students in the classes leave skeptical about ethics. They think it's a big joke. And then I appreciated this just came out, and it was, just seemed a fair description. The authors in business ethics want to seem very flexible and do not want to use ethical theory. So they won't want to say things are right or wrong. They certainly won't use a Stoic approach. And I appreciated someone identifying this as a potential problem. I thought this was fair. There are two problems. So the impression that morals don't matter in markets or in business, maybe the fact of that. And then they will suggest you need a good decision maker to make the right ethical decision, but they don't teach you anything about decision making. So it's this kind of circle. It's like, good luck to you if you're good at that. If you're good at ethical decision making, you don't need my class, right? And then they might see that student succeed. This is some interesting research from economists. So they're encountering this too. There are philosophical views that people who are experts in markets have. They've started to identify them. So this is kind of a increase the honor the preferences of your clients and increase the shareholders' product. And when that is abided by, it looks like it gives people motivation to undermine regulation. So regulation isn't internalized, like, oh, this is what we all need to follow to, play this game fairly. Regulation is instead seen as something you should game, because it is very powerful to think you know what you're doing in markets. But economists themselves have identified, I thought this was bold of them, a missing moral compass that results from following that philosophy. So I feel it's bad philosophy, and we philosophers should respond. Here's a little bit of reason for us to hope a manager could live a philosophical life. I believe things would have to change. I think philosophy might be the start of that. But people who want to be managers are not best at it. That gives us some room. It's like, okay. And then also managers make a huge difference. This is sports with coaching, but apparently, it's hard to track down. But this was a study with a control where they found teams that are well managed, really do better, by double, I think it was. So here's what I would think is met. There is an interest in managers transforming themselves in philosophical ways. And now I'm wondering whether the method of philosophy as a way of life, sorry, I used two different acronyms, could it be relevant? Could management of business involve discourse required, love for others, cosmic perspective? Here's why I don't think we could say yes quickly, not that I doubt any of you would, but getting to talk to all these experts in management, I tried out Hadot's spiritual exercises and got a lot of feedback as to how inappropriate they'd be. So this is an example of a high-level military leader who worked over this with me, and he was he's certain that virtue talk can backfire in an organization. So if you are committed, so he's talking about the US military. So if you're committed to the idea that your institution is necessary and good, it will excuse all sorts of behavior. So he worried about even that. And then he is certain that had many examples of how morale building an emotional leader can be, where if the leader is emotional, you do a little caretaking of the leader, and so step up with your individual responsibility, just very different than you would expect if you tried to apply stoicism to leadership. And then he also really worried about anticipating the worst, because he said that's exactly what you shouldn't do, because one mistake leaders make tactically is have too much confidence. And the one thing we know is that they're going to encounter situations they didn't anticipate. And what can harm people is if they are only ready with a few plans. And then there's a big focus in leadership studies on how one thing you can be aware of is what information would help you to change your mind. So you didn't find that reflected in Hadot's exercises. And then this is where I might get too normative for anybody to bear, but my suggestion would be that ethical theory can really help. And I'm just so curious what your feedback would be, or how that sounds to you. The simplest account of practical rationality you can get from the Stoics is the one I use. And that would actually, I think, be incredibly helpful. And I'll show you that in a moment. It would provide context and checks for the spiritual exercises. So if we have people very nervous about the idea that a leader would be engaged in these spiritual exercises, well, Stoicism gives you a way to incorporate the results of that into a theory that you would at least make you accountable for what you had concluded as a result of spiritual exercise. And I also think it's probably pretty important to understand the role of being a manager in a larger system. And that's one thing I wasn't finding in the management books. They're kind of written as if anyone might become a manager, which might be true, and we'll all be managers at some point. But not much talk about how that role fits in with other roles. And of course, what I keep finding absent is any philosophy of the economy or of markets. So there's not an account of what it means to be a manager in a market like we have. And I think the Stoics could actually give a pretty decent account on all of those things. So here's just an example of the great variety of I don't know, the advice giving in these management theories. So this is Deming's account. They tend to have multiple names, because they last for so long. He had 14 maxims, I think, by the time he finished. And these, messages taken out of context, you can't imagine how many ways they could be interpreted. So nothing against maxims, but the simplest account of the Stoics on practical rationality could come from, just an example from Epictetus of the confusion a dad feels because he can't stand to see his sick child. Had that worry myself about things I don't think I could even see. And he gets talked through with a friend how practically irrational that is. And it's so simple, just a few steps. You ask about what's really good, you get philosophical there. You figure out if that account of good, just what you can say, just a simple norm you could identify, it can't just apply to you, but you see if your motivation can be fit with it. We'll have to trust you on that, but it's still a check. And then the third step would just be, trying to generalize it, like, would you like to be treated this way? Good question for managers. And then finally you check to see if you can do any work on your motivations, so you can be proud of them and not ashamed of them. So Epictetus uses this example of someone changing their mind about something they were very determined was right for them. And if we had that type of approach to the maxims that we have plenty of from people with experience in business, so with the success they've had in organizing people, I think it could make a lot of difference. And I think it would make us more philosophical about management theory. And then my boldest suggestion is that at some point we will need an account of the market, and at some point we might need to think that economic value is indifferent to moral virtue. But that's what I'm so curious, how far we can go with philosophy as a way of life to stoicism.
Thank you very much for a
Thank
wonderful
you.
talk. Please, questions? Alive first?
That's stoicism we're trying on. I'm very proud of myself.
It's even better to talk about stoicism with Sean. Yeah. I mean, I really mean that. I wanted to thank you for the presentation. I think it's just the sort of places where PWL has a responsibility to be thinking about what sort of service it can do, and making sure we're not imagining for ourselves what it means to do service in that context. I think you've shown well the difficulties, so I'm really appreciative of that. Just two thoughts. I mean, it's more for later. I was thinking about, there's not that many, but Xenophon's Oikonomicus, there are, these traditions of texts on the economy and household management. Plenty of problematic things about what that text says, but it's designed to have a conversation about what it means to organize and steward a space. So maybe there's a way to frame around that as an idea, I don't know. And then another I thought from the sort of intercultural dimension is so many Chinese texts are built for leaders, advice for leaders, and are built in sort of anecdotal discussions about particular issues, that could be a really interesting one. And texts, you could also work backwards from the Hanfeize, which is a legalist text, it seems very cynical, but much of the discussion is about how you manage hyper-complex organizations. So with a good teacher, maybe there's a way that texts that are sort of more primed around these kinds of issues could foster the discussion you want.
Yes.
But not to comment now, more for us to think about also as we, you do this work and other ones, but anyways.
No, that's really helpful. I mean, we almost have an abundance of anecdotes and advice from business leaders, and Chinese philosophy is a good counterexample to us because they really normalize market behavior. So I'm thinking that, if we wanted to find an ethical account that normalized market behavior, Confucianism does, and I don't think.
Yeah, and that's a really good point I even thought of, and I wonder there might even be interesting if you look at management theory in China, if there are organizations that thought about these kinds of discussions in that context.
Yeah.
Because texts are built that way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think Gianfranco first, John after.
Thank you very much for your perspective, really. My point of departure is precisely your first point of departure. That is the equivalence that a possible student of management makes between economy or management in this case and natural sciences. The gravity, your example you gave. No, the fact is precisely this, that natural sciences put in question continually their axioms, their points of departure. And the fact that a social science as economy, or a form of economy, the contemporary neoliberal economy, doesn't put in question its own assumption, its own axiom. So maybe it's a possibility, that philosophies will apply to management. Well, could propose precisely this, to put in question the first axiomatic ideas that in which management is involved, in this case. As Foucault, for instance, said, social science are made of discourses. Discourses and scientific discourses can be developed and modified. So we could think, it's a question for you, to think precisely a science of management, precisely as a thought at abstract philosophy, or at or as the philosophy of way of life thought in early modernity, the proper scholastic theology, contesting the scholastic theology, so that's a possibility and the question for you.
Yeah, I mean, one reason I think there's potential here is because these ideas do get tested in management. I don't think they keep track of them in the most effective way, so 89 different theories of, we had the complaint from a real person, just like, oh, they just rename things and they aren't paying attention to the overlap. But I do love the idea of us as test cases. So this hunger for more philosophy, these lists of virtues and, this advice seems a little simplistic to my ears. To me, it's a sign that the system is not working for people, that managers are confused about what they're doing, employees are confused about what they're doing. And then there's great hope. I mean, they were discussing pragmatism in an earlier talk. I forget the professor, but like Mary Follett was a pragmatist who focused on management and suggested a leveling and informal networks, getting rid of the hierarchies. And Elizabeth Anderson has been suggesting those things recently in philosophy. So I see a lot of potential for change if we could only energize people to think more about lives.
Yeah, and thanks, Jennifer. That was really interesting. I just wanted to I mean, I think you're on the right track, right? So, that's the headline. I think that there's a lot of potential for stoicism in this area. I mean, I just wanted to pick up on your very last comment about indifference, right? So, but they're not just indifference, they're preferred indifference, right? So, this isn't, cynicism might have a problem with this stuff, but stoicism precisely doesn't. And in some versions of the Stoic telos, right, the goal is precisely to spend your time selecting things that are preferred according to nature. So stoicism doesn't have a problem with markets at all, in that sense, I would say. But I think what it adds, and this picks up on something you were saying earlier about the kind of slightly flippant attitude towards regulation, is it's the pursuit of preferred indifference so long as you don't compromise your virtue, right? And so it places extra weight on the importance of behaving ethically in the context of pursuing those things that are valuable. And so I think that's where stoicism can be really fruitful in this context, because it's going to emphasize that importance of behaving ethically and paying attention to those sorts of regulations.
Well, let me try this. Like, I think the term indifference is so shocking, but maybe not to you. You might be used to it. But I think of the shock of it as opening up the possibility that we might not choose preferred indifference. And that's where I think people in business, that's the space I don't think they have. So, shocking term, but a reminder that virtue matters more in the end, and there may be cases where you have to make a trade-off. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
But
yeah, you have to be a responsible steward, and these are like life or death issues. Taking dutiful care of resources and your people, and
one final small comment on my brief experience of sort of business and management ethics. Giving a guest talk about sort of Stoic ethics for business within a business ethics course. And previous weeks they studied Aristotelian ethics and Confucian ethics and Ubuntu ethics for business, but there was no evaluation. There was no sense of which one of these is best or which might be useful, let alone teaching the students the kind of critical skills they need to evaluate between these different theories. It was just like, here's a vast potentially incompatible ethical toolkit.
Yes.
Do with it what you want, and that doesn't seem like it was a useful framework for actually, thinking about how to behave ethically. So those
Yes.
foundations look like there's something often missing.
Yeah, no, I agree, and that description of what's wrong with business ethics fits with that, and let me just suggest that one reason business ethics and management professors are too shy to be dogmatic is because there is a criteria for success out in the market, and so they don't feel authoritative. So the business ethics books are written by, the person who re-engineered Toyota or runs Disney, and I think that's an obstacle. And so philosophers need to be more confident, but then they'll need a foundation for that confidence. Thank you.
We have time for one question more, Marta?
Jennifer, thank you. It's a very simple and short question. I was just curious by the expression you used that you are, and you repeated it, that you are really thirsty for philosophy, that you really feel the need for philosophy. Since there is also a meta-philosophical question involved in what we are doing, what kind of philosophy is philosophy as a way of life? What do you really need? What do you feel the lack, or what is the lack you feel? When you say we really have a need for philosophy, are you speaking of,
Well,
what is the need exactly? You feel the need of guidance, spiritual exercises, theorization, theoretical reflection, free time, leisure?
I mean, I am also guilty of having the need for it, but I was trying to describe people in business and management theorists, but yes, I will lump myself in with them. And to me, psychologically, the impact of not having an explanation causes you to not examine things. I think it's felt, with Aristotle there, I guess, I think it's felt, and so not having a philosophical explanation, not really knowing what you're doing. One way they've tracked that, I guess, is in the burnout literature. It's interesting what they'll look at because it really has consequences for them. So I think they started looking at this in nursing, but now in business more generally. But people who leave their careers will describe a feeling of meaninglessness and an inability to ask questions, and not having, like with the nurses, it was not having any sort of ethical authority, so I'm sure that could be found in business as well. But yeah, I think it harms us psychologically because we kind of cannot justify what we're doing. Sounds bad.
I see that we still have time for one more question, so actually, please. Who? Please, here, Michael.
Thanks, yes. It would have seemed to me that the place to start for building, addressing these questions would be the triple discipline, right? The idea that Haddo has the three parts of philosophy, logic corresponds to the discipline of assent, and ethics corresponds to the discipline of impulse, and physics corresponds to the discipline of desire. And then the problem would be, to what extent are these parts separate, isolable? I think in some varieties of modern Stoic movement, I don't want to offend anyone present here, is that they do sometimes cherry pick and treat these three parts of philosophy as though one could just choose one and then ignore the others. And that seems to be a very controversial question. I don't know whether you've reflected on that at all.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I don't worry too much about people doing philosophy poorly because I just figure it's very common. But treating a management theory with a robust philosophical approach, yes, I'm for. And I worry then about how that would be implemented. So, it's not the business ethics professor's fault that their students are only looking for what might serve them in business. There's a kind of feedback loop. So I want to be careful not to imagine too much, that we create philosophers and then they go out in the world and manage people. So yeah, I don't have that solved at all, other than there is some real urgency in leadership studies. So my friend in the military, there are real consequences to getting leadership wrong. So maybe that's the theorists might be at the point that they realize they have this need for philosophy, and they might want to approach it in a robust way this time because there've been so many experiments and kind of approaching philosophy partially.
Please applause.